Would you want to see the Galapagos Islands blown up? Would you want to see the Great Barrier Reef blown up? I don't think you would. You're trying to protect it, wouldn't you? Equate it in that way. Maybe just in our part of the galaxy, the Earth is a bit like an oasis in the desert. A little strip of water with a few palm trees. Equivalent of that. And maybe they come here just to watch us, to surveil us, like we would do if we swim in the Great Barrier Reef. We don't break off the coral, that's no. We watch them in their natural habitat. And I think this is what many species of ET are actually doing. And that's why they don't come forward. They more or less watch. Yeah, like we would do in the Great Barrier Reef. Okay, but we'll talk about that later. So that's the first case. I think that's great circumstantial evidence, because we can't explain what that was in 1942. And is this the only case of a huge metallic disc? No, because in 1944 there are military records at the National Archives with a squadron leader Lever with exactly the same thing. Coming from a raid over Germany, crew of 8 sees on 2 occasions during the one going out towards Germany and one coming back, a huge disc flying between the mountains. All of which are military records at the National Archives. All of which should be on the 6 o'clock news, but they're not. Okay. Conclusion. What else could it be? Metallic row windows, 300 foot. We can't do it now. It's a no-brainer. For those of you that are quite knowledgeable on UFOs, you're aware of the TEHRAN incident, 1976. Who is not aware of the 1976 TEHRAN case? Put your hands up in the air. Okay, thank you. That's maybe half the room. Okay, so let me talk about this case. 1976 in Iran. Basically, people on the ground see, at an Air Force base, see visually on the ground a UFO motionless, hovering near the runway. Okay? And the general says, I want to know what that is. So he sends up a jet fighter, a Phantom jet, F4 Phantom, to go up and see what this static radar confirmed object is. When the aircraft gets to within 25 miles of this object that starts moving away as soon as the plane takes off, as soon as he gets to within 25 yards, he loses all instrumentation. Power failure, electrical power failure, loses all his instruments. So he's forced to return back to the base. A second F4 is sent up to investigate. And the pilot, we now know, is called General. He's now a general, or he retired as a general. That's pretty high rank. Parviz Jafari. So at the time he'd be like something like a flight lieutenant, mid-ranking, Air Force pilot. And he's sent up to investigate. And when he gets close, a strange thing happens. He sees this. That's the pilot, Lieutenant Parviz Jafari. It's not a great drawing, but what we can see on the right hand corner is the F4 Phantom chasing what looked like a diamond-shaped object. Well, actually, in the second half, I'll show you an interview with the pilot, Parviz Jafari. And he said the object was like diamond-shaped and it was pulsing 4 repeat colours. 4 sequence all the time. When he started to get close to it, from the back of the object, a red object separated from it and shot towards him at high speed, collision course. He thought he was going to die. So a defensive manoeuvre by the UFO, being chased, it fires, releases a red object that shoots out on collision course. He has no time to get out of the way. He thinks he's going to die with a collision. Then at the last moment, it goes down the side. He tries to fire at it in that split second when he sees it released towards him. His weapon systems jam. Surprise, surprise. So do we not have jamming mechanisms now in modern aircraft? Do we not take avoidance chaff? If there's a missile fired, they release chaff so that the missile gets directed towards the silver foil and blows up rather than the plane. Defensive manoeuvre. So this red object comes towards him last minute, moves. He then sees the red object go back towards and merge with the main object. Merge. How many planes have we seen merge into another plane? How many objects can we release and remerge seamlessly back into an object? Can we do that now? No. This is 1976. All confirmed on radar. And then he sees a green object further on in the chase that goes straight down to the ground. Descends to the ground and lands. And it's so bright it lights up the whole area like daylight. They go back the next day, the object then just shoots off, gone in a blink. Can't get anywhere near it. Cut the long story short. They go back the next day to try to find where the object had landed, to see if there was any trace evidence. None. There was a farm nearby, and they said, "Did you hear anything?" "Oh, we just said we heard a noise, we just thought it was a thunderstorm." They didn't even look. Nothing was found. But all of this was ground confirmed initially from the air traffic control tower seeing the stationary object over the airfield. That then, as soon as they dispatch an F4, starts to go away. "Oh, I've been caught, we'll best get out." Think about it, what we would do, trying to get away. Object goes, the first aircraft goes, power failure, has to return back to base. Second object almost dies, he thinks he's going to die when this red object comes towards him at collision speed. All of these are provable through documentation. There are military records in the public domain. The pilot and several of the people in the air traffic control tower have gone on record to confirm that this incident happened. The Americans produced a Defence Intelligence Agency report about the whole incident that went right up to the White House. Not that they're interested, obviously. Not that there's anything to this subject, but it went to the White House. You can see it on the CC list. Yeah? So this is a really credible case involving ground radar, airborne radar, ground visual, ground airborne visual radar. To say that this is a real thing manoeuvring in our airspace. That should have made the 6 o'clock news, shouldn't it? Didn't. Only people like me and researchers who've dug out these records, people before me, who've gone to the trouble to get freedom of information requests and got all this information. I've identified the pilot, I've interviewed the pilot, and we'll see a clip in the second half where I'll show him being interviewed about it briefly. So this is an absolutely brilliant case. This is another credible piece of hardware that manoeuvres in a way. It's an unconventional shape diamond, pulsating 4 sequence colours, that releases an object that then is allowed to seamlessly merge back into it, releases another object down to the ground. There's nothing we can do now in the public domain that can do that. So if we rule out all the conventional answers, bear in mind, think of that 1942 case, we still haven't been able to explain that. So that sets the bar pretty high, that there was something flying in our airspace in 1942, doesn't it? If we can't explain in 1942, then really, for me, that's endgame. 1942 proves it. That there were objects operating in our airspace that we couldn't get anywhere near, in terms of design even now. So the case really is proven in 1942, but let's just build this picture up. So now we have this case. To me, all of these elements shows intelligence, because it's defensive manoeuvres in pursuit. It's exactly what we would try to do if a Syrian jet was being chased by another American plane. They'd try to get out of the way and they'd try to do defensive manoeuvres. But they're not capable of doing all this. So it's another piece of circumstantial evidence that says something's flying around that shouldn't be. We talked about the Rendlesham Forest case briefly before some people came in. For 7 years I worked alongside Colonel Holt, Charles Holt, who in 1980 was the then deputy base commander. He was a lieutenant colonel at the time of the incident. And basically, cutting a long story short, over 3 successive nights, the 26th, the 25th into the 26th, the 26th into the 27th, the 27th into the 28th, 3 successive nights of UFO activity near this base. And it was a twin base complex leased from the RAF called Bentwaters and Woodbridge. 2 bases separated by a forest, Rendlesham Forest in the middle. Now, here's the real reason why this is of interest, and it's never really mentioned by any of the documentaries that are made. What was happening in 1980 of a, say, world defence issue? Why Suffolk? What people go, why, why go to little old Suffolk, middle of nowhere? Well, there's very good reasons why. One of the reasons is that in 1980, December 1980, there were 2 world events that were destabilising peace. One was the Iranian hostage crisis. So many hostages have been taken. But the biggest one was the rise of the Solidarność Polish shipyard workers under Lech Wałęsa in Poland. If you remember, in 1980, Poland was still a Soviet state. Poland shipyard workers under Lech Wałęsa said, no, we've got to have reform. Kind of a rebellion, revolution. Now, for those of you who are old enough, they'll remember Hungary, again, earlier, was a satellite Soviet state, and when they started to rebel, it was quashed. Soviet troops went in and quashed it, put it down. No, you're not having your independence. At the time of this event, December 1980, hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops were massing on the borders of Poland, and it looked like they were then going to do another Hungary. So this is a proven fact. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers massing on the Polish border, waiting for the do we go in or not. Now that could have triggered a Third World War. So this is pretty serious. And then of course you've got the tension in the Middle East with the Iranian hostage crisis. So 2 very good reasons why maybe UFOs might think this is a bit of a destabilised time. But why Suffolk? Well, the real answer is, how many people have heard of Greenham Common and the peace protesters at Greenham Common? How many have not heard of Greenham Common in the 80s? Well, basically, the Americans were thought to be bringing in nuclear missiles and housing them at Greenham Common in the nuclear bunker. So the peace protesters set up a camp outside the gates, alongside the fence, and put up the banners saying, we want the missiles out, we don't want nuclear weapons here at this base. But guess what? It was all a lie. Where do you think the nuclear weapons were? Woodbridge. But there's a problem with admitting that they were at Bentwaters and Woodbridge. Why? Because it would break all the armaments agreements. Now I'm going to say this very clearly to you. A senior military figure, who I knew personally, told me that there were more nuclear weapons at RAF Bentwaters in the nuclear bunkers than anywhere else in Europe. And none of them should have been there. So at a time of world crisis, is it a coincidence that when you're looking at a destabilised world, and maybe a threat to our existence even, with a nuclear Third World War, Armageddon scenario, that UFOs go, what the hell are they doing there? Think about it, it's logical, isn't it? Especially if they maybe live here. Now we're all going to smile then. Live here. But how many people realise that in our deepest oceans we only know 1% of the oceans? In 2016 we only know 1% of what's in the oceans. Now think about this. We know more about the surface of the moon and Mars than we do about our own oceans. Now, how many people have seen the film The Abyss, the science fiction classic? Here's a scenario for you. How many people in this room realise that UFOs are seen coming in and out of water worldwide? How many don't realise that UFOs are coming in and out of water? Oh, well done. You do now. But that's reported all around the world, UFOs seen emerging from water into the air, flying off and descending into the water, and have been captured on sonar, being seen by military ships coming out of the water, all recorded, all documentary evidence proving it, multiple witnesses. So if we only know 1%, and like I said earlier, is it not at least feasible to think that when I said they don't want to see this planet get destroyed by our own hand, i.e. nuclear weapons, that maybe they've got some underground bases in the rest of the 99%. And maybe they've been here a long time and are quite happy staying away from us. But we just come out when we want and go back in. You wouldn't want the planet destroyed then, because it would actually be your planet, your home. Which kind of turns it on its head a bit as to why they've got an interest in nuclear weapons. So, time of crisis, more nuclear weapons in Bentwater's weapon storage area than anywhere else in Europe. It broke all the armament agreements. That's why a senior military figure can never publicly say what I've just said, because that really would cause a hornet's nest. And this is why the senior officers of the time will go, oh, we can neither confirm that there were nuclear weapons on the base. Politics. But it's about that. Why Suffolk? More nuclear weapons, destabilising world crisis. Hey, we could just blow this planet up. What are they doing there? So my personal take is that that was a kind of a nuclear inspection. What are they doing there? And bear in mind, for those of you who aren't aware, that on the third night of activity, Colonel Holt, by changing radio channel, having already observed a UFO stopping above his head and shining a beam down to his ground with his other 4 men, like a laser beam came down from say 1,000 feet. So they see an object, come towards them, stop above their heads, laser beam down. He says, is this a warning? Is this a type of communication? That's what he was thinking. They're all in awe. Object then goes towards the base. Now from their geographical position, as they look back towards the base, because of the rough terrain and trees, they can't see exactly where it is over the base, but the object is shining a beam down to the ground, like it did to them. So he changes his radio channel to the weapon storage frequency, and just in time to hear the guy in the tower say that there are beams being shone down into the nuclear storage bunker. I worked on those bunkers, so I can envisage this, exactly what it looks like. There must have been all hell breaking loose. So the implications are that they were scanning the bunkers to see what was in there, and no doubt going, what the hell are they doing in there? What's going on? But it just kind of makes sense when you think about it in those terms. But the beam being shone down, confirmed by several people, including Holt for me, on a personal video from the top of the weapon storage area tower, where he describes exactly what I've said to you. I got him to repeat it on video, so he can't take it back then, can he? That he changed the radio frequency and he heard the guy in the tower where we were stood saying beams were being shone down into the weapon storage area. Can't take it back. Okay? So, cutting a long story short, that is an amazing case. Do you want me to carry on, or do you want to have a little break? Carry on. I've got you for another 10 minutes because we're actually gone past 8, but you talked to me. So basically, let's now look at, so this, for those of you that aren't aware, the news of the world now doesn't exist. That was the headline. Went all around the world. UFO lands in Suffolk, and that's official. And why was it official? Because it made reference to this document, which I'm going to show you now. That's called the Holt Memorandum, written by the guy I worked with for 7 years. Colonel Holt. Then a Lieutenant Colonel. He wrote this to the MOD, or to the Air Force to pass to the MOD. And it's only a brief document. It's, as he always said, it was a taster to say something happened, come and investigate it. But this 3-paragraph document is one of the world's top 5 documents in the history of UFOs, in my opinion. It's a piece of documentary evidence that we could produce in a court of law, anything written. But it's those 3 paragraphs that make it so explosive. The first paragraph says that on the first night of 3 nights, and at that time it was written, he only realised there were 2 nights. On the first night, a landed triangular craft landed in the forest and was seen by some of his airmen. Second paragraph. That object left ground trace impressions. 3 depressions, equilateral. The impressions into the soil to the same depth, same size, same weight distribution. And when they put a Geiger counter over it 2 days later, the Geiger counter only peaked, in terms of background radiation, guess where? In each of the impressions in the ground, indentations. So a Geiger counter goes into the pod hole, as it was described, higher, 8 times higher than background radiation. Later confirmed by the even sceptical Nick Pope. For those of you who know Nick Pope, who works for the MOD. So again, we have a piece of paper corroborating the fact that it was 8 times higher than background radiation, but it only peaked in those 3 areas, and 1 area in the centre of the triangle. If you think of an object taking off, it might have a degree of blast. It's directly underneath it. If that takes off, spaceship kind of thing, that area there, directly under its backside, was an area there where it spiked. But only in the 3 indentations. And then the last paragraph is absolutely incredible. For the simple reason is, how often do you get a lieutenant colonel, extremely high rank, the deputy base commander of a frontline NATO base, saying I saw multiple UFOs himself, and putting pen to paper? That's a bit like the chief constable of Wales Police, South Wales Police, saying, yeah, I saw a UFO land in the forest yesterday. He's not going to do it, is he? Because he'd be crazy, he'd be losing his job. But this guy did. But it wasn't ever supposed to be public. In fact, nobody knew about this incident worldwide until October 1983, when the News of the World got hold of that document, the Holt Memorandum, that piece of paper. It was never meant to go public. In fact, Holt tried his best not to have it released, because he knew that if it did, his life would never be the same. And guess what? It was released, and his life was never the same. So he pretty good reasons for wanting to do that. So all in all, cutting a long story out, how many documents do we have in the public domain that you could take in a court of law, this hypothetical court of law, do UFOs exist, that we can say, oh, hang on, we've got a landed triangular craft seen by airmen, multiple airmen, that leaves ground depressions, trace evidence in the ground, broken branches where it come down through the canopy of the trees, taken off, and also the deputy base commander of a nuclear base saw multiple UFOs himself. It doesn't happen very often, hence why it's such an important document. So that's another string to our bow. That's 3 out of 5. This is a diagram of the triangular craft. It was basically 3 metres by 3 metres. Not very big. It was like glass to the touch. And no machinery, no engines appeared to be either hovering or on legs. And there were some symbols on the side. This was a copy that he put in his pocketbook, Sergeant Penniston. Okay? That's Holt, my photograph of Holt, pointing to where the object sent a beam down in the field. That's the field. And guess what? In over 30 odd documentaries that he'd made worldwide with film crews, nobody had ever took him back to that field. Investigative journalists, don't you say retrace your steps? Show me where it happened, where the murder scene was. Bit odd that, isn't it? We talk about the media all night, because I've got good examples of where they manipulate. So, again, all very, very real. People gone on camera. For many years there were only 2 very brief radar traces. Okay? And people didn't really give them much credence. But about 7 years ago, Robert Hastings, who was an American, wrote a book called UFOs and Nukes. And if you haven't got it, I suggest you go buy it, because it's all to do with UFOs and nuclear weapons. Okay? And in that, he was able to get 2 witnesses to come forward. And guess what? These weren't police officers. These were air traffic controllers, a totally different department that you never see mentioned on any Rendlesham documentary. And they went public to say during that Christmas period they were on duty. They couldn't be specific as to the night, but they said over that Christmas period they saw multiple UFOs come over the base and were confirmed on the air traffic radar. So we have a totally brilliant corroboration now, not just from police officers who were tired, oh they didn't recognise the forest, oh they got frightened one night, they went outside, they got frightened. Oh yes, let's give them a machine gun, but they'll get frightened in the woods. Which is how the media would portray it. Not in reality. So that's 3 out of 5. The 4th bit I've actually already touched upon in the warm-up. 2 F-16s on the night of the 31st of March 1990 chase a radar and visually confirmed UFO on the ground. Think of that TEHRAN case. UFO hovering over the military base. Air traffic controllers go, oh, what's that? Send up an interceptor, F-16s in this case, very top aircraft of the day, 1990. They chase it for 75 minutes. It's at night. They never get a visual. But all the time the telemetry data and radars confirm it. So it was visually seen before the pilots went up on the ground. So you've got a ground visual, ground radar visual, and then the pilots went up there and they're getting a visual on their radar, and all the telemetry data is being recorded on 7 different airports. 3 military and 4 civilian airports tracking this thing, and they're not the same radar. I'm not a radar expert, but they're all different types of heights, what they cover, what's included in the scheme of the radar pattern. All tracking the same object. All that telemetry data, at one point the object does a right angle turn and it pulls 35 Gs. The maximum for stealth now is 11 to 12. So we could produce that telemetry data like the drink driver court of law, in our hypothetical court of law as to the existence of UFOs. Your Honour, I now produce telemetry data from this incident, GH1, telemetry data, and it was tracked on blah 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 blah. This has been checked, blah blah blah. It's not a mistake, pulled 35 Gs. Almost 3 times what we're capable of doing now in 2016 before you pass out. So again, 1990, this is a great piece of evidence that we could present as our circumstantial picture of building up this picture of what's real and not real. Now just quickly, the guy on the left is, he was then the deputy of the Belgium Air Force, and he did a press conference, kind of like this, and he actually presented the telemetry data to the Belgian media, which is very rare. We don't usually get military saying, "No, we've got this," but they were very open. And this guy's been interviewed many times, and he says, when it's stealth, he goes, the stealth manoeuvres are nothing like the manoeuvres shown. And he's basically saying, he stopped, because he was still serving, he stopped one short of saying he was extraterrestrial, but he said it's not stealth. The flight manoeuvres, a right angle turn, at one point it jumps 5,000 feet in 3 seconds. Straight up. Okay? The guy on the right is the actual Belgian radar civilian expert who was called in to work with the Belgium radar military specialists. So after it happened, they wanted an expert to come in to work alongside the military radar experts to confirm that they were in agreement. And he gets tracked down by a British researcher called Harry Harris, who was a solicitor but had a big interest in UFOs. He tracked him down to a hotel in London. He'd come over to London to actually talk to the MOD. And he tracked him down to his hotel, and he gave an interview for him. Knocked on his door with his wife and said, "Can I interview you about this, Belgium?" And at one point, and I've got the video clip, it's about 11 minutes long, but at one point he draws this manoeuvre, talks about this, and so eventually Harry Harris says to him, so what do you think it was? And he looks around the room and he goes, well, maybe I shouldn't say this, but it points towards extraterrestrial. He actually goes on camera and says that. Why is that on 6 o'clock news? It's not. Why? So that's the fourth case, that's the manoeuvre. Right, so it's coming in, then it goes straight, right angle turn, goes straight up, goes down. So at that point there, it does 35G, up, and then it drops 5,000 feet in 3 seconds. And then pulls out of the dive. We can't do anything like that. So it proves that there was an unusual, unconventional object flying in our airspace, without a shadow of a doubt. And finally, in fact I might save this for the, because I think you're being patient now, it's 1:15, and I said 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. I'll save this last case because there's some video that will go with it if you haven't seen it. But what I'll tell you about it before we have a break, so just give me 2 minutes, is how many people are aware of the STS-75 tether incident? Put your hands up if you are aware. Maybe 8 or 9 people. Okay, so the vast majority in this room, I know. Well, the beauty of it is, it's an incredible case because it involves footage that belongs to NASA, and it's their military specialists talking about what's happening on the screen, and it's not been CGI'd, and it's never been explained. So you've got that to look forward to in a clip, because I'll show you what they saw when they zoomed in. When the tether, let me just tell you, the tether was an experiment. The shuttle released a satellite device, and what it was going to do, it released a cable that was 12 miles long, and it was just going to roll out like a long ruler, and then they were going to put an electrical charge once it fully rolled out, just to see how it operated in space, basically. And that's the extent of my knowledge on it. But what happened was, as it got part of the way out, the electrical cable, for whatever reason, snapped. So it basically drifted away, and if you like a rubber band, and it snaps, it'll all curl up. Well, that's exactly what happened. The tether, this 12-mile long piece of rope for all intents and purposes, snapped away, coiled up, and then as it drifted away from the shuttle, it then began to unpeel and go straight again. And eventually, when they zoom in on it, it's back to like a ruler. And they zoom in, and it's NASA's footage. And we'll see what we see in the second half. Okay? During this break, if anybody wants to get anything, just tell me now. Alright, or subscribe to the magazine, see me now or at the end. Alright, so if we come back, it's now 17 minutes past. If we come back in 15 minutes time,